Thank you. It's a real privilege to be here. And what I would like to say is thank you to Lynn and to AFTEC for inviting and looking after me in Kitcorn. I mean, we have been incredibly well looked after. We've been here for about 8-9 days now. And I think what's really interesting is to be introduced to a city. I've never been to Hong Kong before, but to be introduced to it through its children and its schools and its creativity. And that's really exciting. So I'm going to talk about some of the changes that have happened in England over the last 20 years. I'm actually going to touch on the last 40 years. We live in a period of change continually. And I think how we adapt and how we work together in collaboration and partnership is one of the things that we have been addressing and trying to work with in England. Okay, so these are some of the changes that have happened, and there are many, many more. But where we start in 40 years ago, the funding system. So at the top, in 1978, the funding system started to recognize that the relationship between schools and culture was important, and they started to invest in that. I won't go through all of these things because some of them I'm going to start to sort of talk about in more detail. But fundamentally, the big things that happened for me and my organization was the creation of creative partnerships in 2002, which I'll talk about. Then, in 2010, after the financial crisis, the UK went into a period of austerity, which meant cuts, and quite significant cuts in terms of schools, but also in terms of creativity and culture. Then, in 2020, 10 years later, we made the choice to leave the European Union. And that has had significant consequences in terms of who we are, how we think about ourselves, and where we're going to be in the future. So there are a number of things that I'll refer to as I go through, and I'm going to be talking quite top line. Kitcorn, what I loved about what he did yesterday is he went into real detail around evaluation and process. I'm going to be talking about the intention behind things, and I hope that's okay. So London. I'm sure many of you have been to London. I'm going to talk a little bit about the context of London and the fact that the city informs who we are and the work that we do. And I'm going to talk about that in quite a bit of detail. So we are a not-for-profit organisation. Our primary audience is children and young people, but we don't just work with schools. We work with the cultural sector. We also have an employment program. So we are looking at the cycle of children in school, but also how young people get access to the creative sector. So we have a big digital economy in London. Film, television, websites, whatever. And actually, that's the marketplace that schools currently aren't quite preparing children for. Okay, so a lot of the conversations we've had with schools this week has been why. What is this about? What are we trying to do? And in terms of my organisation, our vision is about a world where all children and young people achieve their creative potential. It's a big vision. It's a world vision. And what this project is part of is a bigger conversation that is happening across the world. And I think that's really important. The things that drive my organisation are our values. We are a values-driven organisation, and we use our values as the framework to evaluate who we are. So London currently is not a very equitable place. There are wealthy people, and there are very, very poor people. And one of the things that we look at is how we can distribute the assets. And I think of the cultural sector as assets. I think of teachers as assets. They are part of an ecology in the system, and how can we connect them more effectively? So a lot of our values are things that people were talking about yesterday. Connection, connectivity, connecting people, trust and respect, to work in partnership, you have to trust and respect one another. And that takes time. That takes time and trust to build. And creativity is part of our culture. And one thing that we have recently added is kindness. And we don't talk about being kind. And I think that's really important. That actually we need to be generous. We need to listen to each other. Okay, so our work is very varied. But these are the 5 primary things that we look at. So learning and leadership. So leadership of CPs, leadership of teachers, leadership of children. Children being leaders. We think about leadership all the time. The way that we do that is we create networks. Networks of people who are thinking the same, people who are thinking differently. And we bring people together. We connect them together. So this is the kind of work that we do, this kind of forum. We also think about places, because London is a series of places. It's not just one place. It's lots of little places. And we generate research and insight. We commission work, and we share that with our audiences and our sectors. And I prioritize our organizational culture, how we work as an organization. Are we being kind? Are we being equitable? That kind of thing. Okay, I'm going to rattle through some of this. London. Here is, we do a lot of visual infographics, looking at how to present some of the issues in the city. So in 2018, before the pandemic, we talked to a lot of children. We asked children and young people what were the issues to them. And we have a significant rise in anxiety and depression. So young people feeling under a lot of pressure and articulating that. We have a lot of poverty. 27% of families live in poverty in the city. Access to green spaces. I know you don't have a lot of green spaces in Hong Kong. I've worked that out. You know, playgrounds are often on the roof, and there aren't many places for children to play. It's a big issue for us. 50% of families do not have access to green spaces, or they don't live near to them. Young people feel that their voice is not being heard. They're not being listened to. And that's important, particularly if you're asking them to go on a creative journey with you. Other things, pressures of institutions. Actually, we're all working harder than we ever have. We're under a lot of pressure. Okay, in terms of statistics, we have over 3,000 schools in London. I've not worked with all of them. It's impossible to do that. Getting them to connect is very difficult. In terms of young people, we have about nearly 1.5 million kids who live in the city. And our population is declining, very similar to yours. Before COVID, it was projected that it was increasing, but it is going down. In terms of the ecology, we have 258 national portfolio organisations who are funded by the arts system to work in London. We have 133 accredited museums. We have 358 public libraries. So we have a lot. There is a lot in the city, but it is not distributed effectively. It is not shared with everybody. Not everybody knows where everything is. So one of the things we have is a website that tells people where things are. Not everyone uses it, but it's there. Okay, let's move on. So the concentration of where arts and culture is largely in the middle of the city. But here, on the edge, is where the children live. So the white is where most of the children of the city live. We don't have the equivalent of your MTR. Our underground is not as good as your public transport system. Seriously, it is tired, it is old, it is not great. So actually getting schools and teachers to access what's available is quite difficult. Right. So, the London Challenge. I wanted to talk about this because 30 years ago, the history of London schools was not great. London schools were perceived as places that weren't safe, the quality of teaching was not good, and the buildings were tired. And a lot of our teachers were being brought in from South Africa, Australia, other parts of the world. And government clocked this quite quickly, and they invested for 10 years. 10 years, many millions of pounds, looking at the leadership of London schools. And now, because of this investment, London schools are the best in the country. Academically, they are the best environments to send your kids. And the things that they focus on during the London Challenge, and this was all happening, I'll tell you in a minute, in a period. It was about implementing change and developing policy through practice, trying work. It was about drawing on knowledge and assets in the system. If there was good leadership in a school, that leader would talk to other leaders. And there was a network of sharing and communication, learning from experimentation, establishing project management disciplines. I mean, it's quite basic stuff, but it changed everything. And for my colleagues in the cultural sector, I would say to you, could we learn from what happened here around sharing thinking around leadership, not just with one another, but with the education sector? Okay, so this is one of the biggest things I was involved with. It was called Creative Partnerships. A lot of what Kitty Khan was talking about yesterday started here. It was not as sophisticated as what Kitty Khan was talking about. It was 20 years ago, it was a pilot, and it was looking at creativity and partnership in school. And what Lynn has been developing is a much more sophisticated, structured way of working than what was started here. But fundamentally, it was about using the assets of the city with a creative agent or a creative practitioner to make change happen. But the change was not just for the school, it was also for the creatives and their practice. It was big, right? There were 8,000 projects over 10 years, 1 million children involved, 90 teachers. In 1 year, I would be working with 300 schools. Not me on my own. This cost a lot of money. This was about government investing 33 million pounds a year in creative education. It was big. It had a lot of people involved. There was a lot of profile. And in 2010, we went through a period of austerity. What did the government decide? This is not a priority. So it gets cut. The world is now embracing this concept, and the place where I live, where it started, is not. And that's really difficult. But many of those principles, many of those organizations, I'm still working with. They're still creative. They're still making stuff happen. So, in terms of my organization, we delivered creative partnerships for 10 years, and it was fantastic. It was very rich, massive learning, a lot of the evaluation that Kitty Khan was talking about. Everything gets reduced, and my organization is invited to become this. And we become part of a national network of 10 bridge organizations, funded by Arts Council England through the equivalent of the Jockey Club, the lottery, to use our experience and expertise to connect children and young people, schools and communities with art and culture. The key is to provide support, information, data, and infrastructure. Infrastructure is the key word. We are the bridge. We help people cross from one side of the river to the other. We support people through that journey. And we were the bridge for London for 10 years. Again, in terms of our values, we facilitate networks. We also do brokerage, so we help schools who want to try things to connect them with organizations or individuals who make stuff happen. One of the key things, I'm not going to talk about Arts Ward, I'm going to talk about ArtsMark. So this is something that was created 20 years ago by Arts Council to look at what the offer for the school might be. And it's a planning tool. It's not retrospective. It's not going, we're really good at this. It's about, where do we want to go? How do we want to plan? Who do we want to work with? And it's a brilliant tool for schools, but also for the cultural sector, for parents, for children to have a conversation. And it's the only creative quality standard for schools in the country at the moment. It's about developing and celebrating, and these are the areas that it focuses on. So what are the values of the schools? What's the ethos? What's the leadership like? How does that work? What do children and young people want as part of their offer? What's curriculum design and delivery look like? CPD, you know, the kinds of work that you're doing with AFTEC, how is that built into a plan? And this is all public. This goes on the school's website. They articulate to their public, these are the things that we think are important. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it does create a conversation. And it's a conversation with partners. And the partners, oops, let me go back, sorry. The partners can be businesses, arts organizations, creative individuals. Okay, so we help make that happen in London. Okay, we have not given up the creativity thing. We always will be creative. It's important to us. One of the ways that we're being creative at the moment is to use this, which Kitty Corn has referred to, which Lynn and the CP and the schools are referring to. This is the 5 habits of mind that has emerged since Creative Partnerships, and it's a good frame for people to think about what they're doing in terms of imagination, curiosity, persistence, collaboration, and discipline. And what we do is we create resources. So we create resources which are basically online that schools download. But we don't create them on our own. We invite teachers, creatives, and cultural sector to work with us to do that. And they're for all ages, but they are about the bits of the curriculum that teachers find hard. So we are looking at personal relationships, sex education through these resources. We're looking at some of our colonial history and how teachers might be able to teach that sensitively. So that's one of the ways that we're engaging with creativity. Okay, this is just an idea. I don't know whether this would work in Hong Kong, but there was Boris Johnson, when he was mayor of London, he commissioned, before he was prime minister and then he left, he was actually a very good mayor, because what he did is he wanted to grab education. He wanted to look at why London schools were so successful. And he commissioned an inquiry into that success. And what he realized, it was about leadership. And one of the things he came up with, which is so bizarre, is this idea of the London curriculum. And the idea is to look at London as a classroom, but not just for the kids, for the teachers, for the parents, to think about how the city can be used as a learning resource. We were involved in the setup of this right at the very beginning. I think it was amazing. We got 1,000 schools involved. Again, it was about teachers leading stuff themselves. The resources were everything from, here, a novel, a Gothic novel, to the modern mystery, books about London. How do you engage and excite children about the place in which they live, when generally they don't go into the centre, they don't see stuff. We worked with the transport system, the tube. When was it built? What was the design like? And actually it was really creative because it was a conversation across the city about who we are and how we live together. Last year, this got cut. But my organisation might run it soon. That's what I'm thinking. What I thought was exciting about the London curriculum is it invited a conversation with the cultural sector to think about one idea. How could they contribute? How could they make change? How could they think about things differently? That was exciting. Okay. This is one of my favourite ever projects, right? So, have you all heard of Steve McQueen, the artist, the Oscar-winning filmmaker? So he came up with an idea called Year 3. Year 3 is when children are 7, they're in Year 3. When he was 7, he went to the Tate Gallery, Tate Britain, and he decided when he was 7 he wanted to be an artist. It was a big moment in his life. He wanted to invite every 7-year-old to be in a photograph at the Tate Modern. Tate approached a new direction and said, how are we going to do this? And I went, I don't know. We'll work it out. And it took 2 years. And so this is like a class. It was amazing. Not just because we were taking photographs of kids, because to take those photographs, we had to have a workshop with every single class around who they were, where they were from, what they think of London, citizenship, the whole thing. And we put 612 photographs of the children all around the city. So you would be driving for 2 weeks or on a bus and go, there's my class, there's me. Parents and children would be like going to see their photograph. So the conversation around children in the city, they were on the tube, right? With Tate, we had to, once we started to take the photographs, the kids were going to have to come and see. They were going to have to come and see themselves in the gallery. There weren't enough toilets. There wasn't enough place for the children to sit, to be. So we had to work with Tate. In terms of statistics, it's the biggest thing I've ever done. We worked with 1,500 schools. There were 76,000 children, 300 and whatever, a lot of kids. And it was really significant because children were visible in London at that time. And that was important. Okay, I'm not going to talk about this. We continually have conversations about creativity. A lot of talk, policy, implementation is problematic. Schools still struggle with this. Head teachers find it very hard to make the time. Creatives go, I don't really know whether I want to move all that way over. It's difficult. This work is hard, it takes time, and it takes money. Okay, I'm going to finish by looking back to look forward. So we have just been involved in a conversation around a report that was written 40 years ago. It was a very famous report in England called The Arts in Schools. And it was led by Sir Ken Robinson, who recently died. And it changed everything. This report enabled the national curriculum in the UK to happen. So the idea was to revisit a report written in 1982 and to consider the place of the arts as part of the school curriculum in the maintained sector of education. So that was the original report, and this is what it was trying to achieve. In 1982, there was no national curriculum. No Ofsted. Ofsteds are inspectors of schools. No exams. The kids didn't have exams, the SATs or the exams that they have to go through. Schools were run by local authorities. Now they're not. There was no internet, no YouTube, no Twitter, no Facebook, no TikTok, no AI. The Scottish people didn't have a government. They have a government now. Wales has a government. Lots of things have changed. There was no definition of the creative industries as an employment sector. We now have that. And we have had 22 secretaries of state over the last for education over the last 40 years. So a lot of change. The way that we did the report is we brought great people, leaders together in 9 round tables which were recorded. We had a group of young people who tracked every single conversation and were involved in the debate. And these are the 5 core principles that we think need to be addressed in terms of our education system. Breadth, exposure to all art forms and breadth of work and experiences. Balance between knowledge and skills. Not just about facts and being told stuff, it's about doing things. Inclusion, recognizing that we're not all the same, we all learn differently. Relevance, this was one of the strongest things that came through. Reflecting of the world in which the children live now and work now. Learner voice, listening to the children. Not just telling them, inviting them to have a conversation. There are 10 principles now, 10 recommendations that we're moving forward on. A national conversation about the purpose of education. Now, Lynn and I have a discussion around expressive arts means something else here. Expressive arts is a new term for us that has come from Scotland, which is a way of explaining what art subjects could be in the curriculum. Key is the challenge of how we assess art subjects. We don't assess them well. They take time. They involve different skills. We want to create an arts entitlement, a minimum of 4 hours for kids, and the support for the arts in schools from the professional sector. What I think has happened in my country is a lot of the cultural sector tells schools, this is what we've got. You're going to like this. This is going to be great. They aren't asking schools. They aren't listening to schools. They aren't creating things with schools. And I think that is something that might be relevant to here. So it's not great in the UK, but... Oh, here you go. So it's all on our website. There's quite a lot on there. There's a whole series of videos. It's not all doom and gloom, right? So my organisation has just been through a big change in terms of its funding. And we have landed a lot of money, £5 million over the next 5 years to develop a new project. And it's based on what I've been talking about, access, entitlement, creativity. It's a new funder, and we've been working with them for about 18 months to develop this. The primary aim is to support and value primary school teachers, recognizing them as leaders and supporting them and holding them. We haven't started yet. We've only just got the money. We start in September, and we're going to pilot it for a year, very much like what AFTEC have done with their program. This is the model. Networks, focus, masterclasses, cultural partnerships, coming up with packages that go into schools, taking schools out, a different conversation around children around the city, looking at resources, online lessons, and growing a market, growing an ecology where it's normal for a child to go to Tate Britain. It's normal for a parent to go, oh, you're going to see the orchestra tonight. Fantastic, let's do that. That is not normal currently in London. And as part of it, we'll do research, evaluation frameworks, etc. So I'm quite excited. It's been tough. We've had a tough time in London recently. Anyway, there you go. I hope you've enjoyed it. There's stuff on our website. Thank you. What? Okay.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you so much for that presentation. We learned a lot at the back. 咁而家就有 Q&A 環節啦，唔知大家有冇啲問題想問 Steve 咧？
係，如果有問題咧，我哋嘅同事係會遞咪俾你嘅。
I suppose, like yesterday, I will start off with the first question. So I think something that we all want to know as someone kind of as advocates for creative education and also creative training for teachers, it's that how do we get policymakers or funders or government, to actually support these kinds of initiatives? Because obviously we've got the Jockey Club sponsoring AFTEC's pilot program, and then you've also managed to obtain funding. But, how do we convince people that this is important?
I think the only way to convince policymakers is through parents. And I think governments change all the time. Policies change all the time. But parents' expectations of what their children get in school. Most parents didn't have a good experience of their own education. And I think we need to remember that they want the best for their child, and they think the best might be an academic education. And I think we can't predict what life is going to look like in 30 years. And our children are going to need different skills than we have. And parents need to be taken on that journey. And parents are the people who vote the politicians. And we have to think about things in different ways. And even if the policy is wrong, we carry on. Like Lynn has carried on with this piece of work. You carry on. You test. You pilot. You make it happen.
It's a good answer, I suppose. Yeah.
I read mostly The Guardian for news in England. I'm having a great difficulty balancing what I've read about education in England in The Guardian and what you've just said. I don't know which one is right, but there is a great discrepancy between what you've just said and what I read every morning. And I don't know why there is this discrepancy. Is it just a matter of attitude or different data, different facts, or what? Please enlighten.
I think The Guardian is a particular paper that has a particular agenda against this particular government, which is fine. That's what it's there for. I think The Guardian is quite accurate about some things, but I think on the ground, things look very different. I think there are really positive things that you will find in every school, in every cultural organisation. You just need to look for them. And I don't think The Guardian is necessarily the best representation of who we are at the moment. I mean, we have a very difficult government at the moment. The education system is all about knowledge. But I am working with teachers and heads and principals who are trying to change that. And I believe change happens from the ground, not from the government. I really do believe that. That's how things happen.
Hello. Thank you for that very, very inspiring talk. To persuade policymakers, even parents, governments, and so on, we often need to quantify the benefits that you get out of whatever funding they put in. How would you do that for creative, even expressive art? How do you quantify the benefits to the children to persuade the policymakers?
When we did creative partnerships, what was very unusual was ministers were completely involved. right? They would come to schools. They believed in it. But the problem is ministers change. And I think there is a sort of... There needs to be a bigger conversation, which is not just about policymakers. I really think how we think about our economy and the creative aspect of our economy. I'm not answering the question because it's not easy. I think you have to work with all ministers, and there has to be something that cuts through, which for me is about the rights of the child. And every child with the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child is entitled to play, is entitled to rest, and is entitled to access culture. And if we, as a 21st century, do not create the opportunities for children to experience culture, whether that is hearing classical music for the first time or composing their own piece of music, you need to give everyone that opportunity. So I think the argument around opportunity and inequality is important. But I think there's something about holding up a mirror to the politicians and saying, you're saying this, but in reality, it looks like that. It's hard. I really do think it's hard, and I haven't got the answer.
Arts becomes the first thing that gets cut because I guess people can't really put a measurement to it, and yeah.
And I don't think the measures that we've got for visual art, dance, music, digital are good. And I think we need to invest in that. I think some of the frameworks that Lynn has been using are, great. What Kittycorn is doing, we have to commit to testing, but in a way that is not going to undermine the process. But that's about a conversation.
Hello, Steve. Hi. I enjoyed the talk a lot, and you have given us a lot of insights. You just mentioned about getting the ministers to talk with one another. I think our biggest issue now is cross-bureau. It seems that they don't talk a lot. And I see in the slide the education minister and culture, they are talking. But now our scenario is that the education people only care about education. So the cultural and sports and stuff is another one. They perceive it for the tourists and bringing money in. So how to get those policymakers within the government talk to one another, and also with us, and also with teachers and the creative industry people.
But maybe, I think Lynn slightly disagrees with me, but maybe the tourism opportunity that is coming up, it might be about flipping that round and going, okay, what do we want to present to the world? What is the narrative around how we work with our children, and how do we want to present our children to the world? I think that's when you get buy-in. I think there's also something around, you have the new afternoons might be more relaxed. Actually, how could that become more coherent as an offer? So the cultural sector's involved, but there's a big conversation across the city. I think ministers don't like talking to other departments because they just want success, and they want... Yeah. No. And I think what we've got to be true to is, what are our KPIs? In 10 years' time, how do we want things to look? So actually, those ministers will go in 3-4 years' time, but we're going to carry on building discreetly. So it's about being pragmatic. I do think we need to look at how we measure and evaluate art subjects, though, more effectively. I don't think the measures we've got are the right ones.
Great. Thank you so much, Steve.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Steve.